Hey, how's it going? We're gonna do a little fun thing here that I like to call YouTube Bro Science debunks climate change. I know, it's a hilarious concept. It's a very funny story. Tom Zog here, a prolific internet troll. I'm just working on this thing. So basically, I mean, what happened, how I spent my morning today, was arguing with the guy over the internet, as us internet trolls love to do. And of course, the topic we were talking about was climate change. I have a different view of things, of course, and I find I generally I get things out of arguing things with people, and not in a, I mean, sometimes a little hostile, but more in like a hostily playful way. And I think sometimes it gets a little intense. But long story short, I spent the better part of 3 hours arguing with this guy this morning about climate change, and it's not that he changed my mind as much as he helped me refine my argument to the point where I think I can articulate a little bit better what a lot of people that disbelieve the theory of CO2 based climate change, and well, this is just what I think. Why I don't think it's carbon dioxide. I think what's causing climate change, and I don't deny that climate change is taking place. The climate is certainly changing. But where I disagree with kind of the consensus science community, whatever consensus science is, where I disagree with them is on the cause. I believe that the cause of the increase in temperatures that we're experiencing here on the Earth is caused by an increase in solar activity. So what I'm going to do as part of this fun adventures in trolling is I'm gonna read through this very very entertaining Facebook debate on the old climate change there, ladies and gentlemen. Gonna have a good time with it. At the end of the day, if I'm wrong, we can still have a good laugh. I'm definitely not a scientist. I'm just a guy with a fairly high IQ, good understanding of math and some of the concepts of quantum mechanics. I mean, I feel like in this day and age with the internet and access to university lectures from all over the world from various professors in basically any subject that you want, you can learn a lot just by watching various YouTube clips. I think your mind is like a garden, and whatever you plant in there is what you're gonna get. I mean, YouTube is more than blooper videos, cops shooting black people, and cats. There's also really good lectures on history and the French Revolution, and well, I mean, shit, it's YouTube. You know what it is. Anyways, so this is this wonderful argument. I'm going to leave out the gentleman's name out of respect, He's a young lad, eh? And I was kind of giving it to him a little hard, because that's often how we do things on the internet. We're a little rough around the edges to each other, and I whatever. Anyways, so this is all in response. So this is all on a sub thread on the old face bag. And it's basically some lady had posted a comment about how basically anyone that's trying to deny the CO2 based theory of climate change is working for the oil companies. And it's funny because, in my perspective of things, I think the people that advance the idea that climate change is being caused by CO2 are part of some type of global communist conspiracy aimed at introducing a global carbon tax to eventually form a global government to control the entire Earth without ever being elected to do so. So that's what I think about them. And of course, what they think about me is that I'm a shill for an oil company. Now, full disclosure here, my old man sits on the board of directors of some oil company. We don't really talk very much, though, right? I'm not getting a paycheck for this. I'm like a lovable hobo. I travel around from place to place and try and make life make sense and try and live true to myself as best as I can. And it's been a hard path to walk, being this type of person that I is. But that's what you get. What you get when you got to be who you are. Okay, so the young man basically his opening comment, his opening salvo that invites on this 3-hour debate is he starts agreeing with the screenshotted thing, because basically the lady that posted this comment, she was just like she thinks about climate change and the people that say it's being caused by CO2 the same way I do. You're a bunch of freaking commies that don't understand science, and that's our legitimate opinion of you, eh? And I just hope that we can, learn how to talk to each other again before, we want to start throwing fists at the air and being all angry at each other, because that never solves anything, eh, folks? So here we go. She's not wrong. She's not wrong, just that the propaganda isn't by right-wing owners, it's by big oil corporations. There's literally no reason for people on the right not to believe in climate change, other than how their party thinks about it. Oil isn't a necessity if you have nuclear. And then he does AMA, which is the classic Ask Me Anything. Well, that's an invitation. So I say increase solar activity. Why is temperature rising on other planets in the solar system? It's a good question. And he says, Thomas, solar activity hasn't increased. And I say, what's the data you're looking at to refute that claim? And he posts a link to something called skepticalscience.com. So I'm going to just do this whole here. Mind the mess that I live in. Okay, so, can we, I don't know, are we seeing that? Okay, so this is the graph, okay, that he's pointing at. Now I want you to notice these lines here, right? These are the averages, but I don't know if you can see these averages that these lines are arrived at, right, are based on some more accurate data that kind of does this whoop, 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 whoop thing, right? But it's an average going all the way across there. Okay, so that's kind of the image. If you want to follow along at home for yourself, it's skepticalscience.com is the website where you can see that. Now I say, LOL, that graph is so transparently misleading. It's hilarious. You can't average out yearly spikes in the sun's cycle like that. Now, those aren't yearly spikes. Those are on an 11-year cycle. At least if you want there to be accurate information, thermal energy from the sun travels much slower than light from the sun by about 30 years. Knowing that, look at the actual data on the graph, not the childish average on the graph applied to the data. Now, this is something that happens in YouTube arguments all the time. Someone makes a valid point, and then the other guy just wants to plow on by and ignore, like you didn't just make that valid point. And so he goes, and there's some recent data that shows that we've come to a point where it can't be recovered, where it can't be reversed much. So I guess let's just face what's coming to us. And so this is a thing about Arctic sea ice. If you've been in a lot of these global warming debates, part of this, you're going to see this guy is parroting a lot of those consensus science points of view. And my biggest objection to consensus science is that that's not actually scientific. That's just everyone agreeing with each other. So now he says, but seriously, stop lying to yourself and the people around you about it. Thomas, I cannot change your mind. I was a denier myself till I had to write a paper disproving it. But hey, you do you, I guess. Nice. So what I'm trying to point out to the young man at this point in our discussion is I say 1890, going back to the graph, in 1890 there's a medium spike in solar irradiation. And in 1920, there's an increase in temperature. So a difference of about 30 years. Keep in mind the graph isn't super accurate, so there is, a little bit of play in there. And then he posts a link to some 4chan stuff that, frankly, I never really clicked on. Because I keep on trying to hammer home what I'm seeing, which is that... Here, we'll go back and I'll try and show you what I'm seeing. Okay. Are you seeing this? Okay. So here is 1890, right? And in 1890, right, all the way to, 1915, really, you have this correlation of spike in temperature from 1890 to 1915, right? Now there's another one here at about 1920, and you have a corresponding spike in temperature in or around 1950. You see? From there to there, right? It's I don't know, my mind is just really good at seeing these patterns. Of course, I am just an idiot, and I did title this YouTube Bro Science, Debunks Climate Change by CO2. So let's see where this goes, eh? Okay. Thomas, you're literally regurgitating historical events that don't imply what might happen in the future. Maybe the greenhouse gases will stabilize, maybe not. I haven't even mentioned greenhouse gases. Because this is another thing that I disagree with, because they say there's a hole in the ozone layer, but that the planet is warming up because of the greenhouse effect. And if you've ever had a greenhouse, you would know that a giant hole in the top of your greenhouse would not make it very hot. All of the hot would escape out the top of the greenhouse. Okay. 1930, smaller spike in radiation. 1960, dip in temperature. And this is where we get a little bit of that internet pizzazz, eh? Dude, admit it. You don't know how to read a fucking graph. So whatever goddamn paper you think you wrote about is pure bullshit. Garbage in, garbage out, I said. And he goes, sounds like you're literally reading off some climate change skeptic blog, which I wasn't. I was literally just picking apart his graph and improving my argument while arguing with this prick. But he was a nice kid. But a prick. And I go, no, I'm reading the data off the graph you linked to. The only difference is I'm reading the actual temperature data points, not the average, because I actually know how to science. And I think this is the big difference between, the bro scientists and the scientists, the Bill Nye scientists. Because the bro scientists try and figure this shit out for ourselves. Because I think most of my brethren in the bro science community, we're of the understanding that if something is logical and makes logical sense, then any logical person can understand it. Okay. Little pricky boy says, don't know how to read a graph. You seem to literally just say what the graph is showing, and not the conclusions drawn from it. Yeah, the temperature spiked in the 30s and dipped in the 60s, but this increase and decrease has been occurring at an overall increasing rate. So this is a thing where he doesn't want to agree to the statement of facts. He wants to jump to the conclusion before making sure that we're both on the same page, right? So I keep going through this and really trying to just get him to see what I'm talking about. And he doesn't want to acknowledge that he sees what I'm talking about, which tells me he's just using argumentative debate tactics instead of actually doing some scientific inquiry here. 1940, slight increase in radiation from 1930. 1970, slight increase in temperature from 1960. Every year, once, the temperature dips and comes back up. That's how seasons and climates work. So now he doesn't even understand how the sun is working because he's not getting what I'm trying to explain to him there. Because he's trying to say that this line here, we're gonna do this again. I wish I had better technology. Damn you, poverty. All right. So what he's trying to say is this line, this average line of the solar irradiance levels, right? That shit is what you should go by, not these actual data points here. Now these lines here in temperature, again, you can see that they have these peaks and valleys that are already averaged out. These are already averaged out numbers. Okay. So they're taking accurate data and then making it even. They're making it misleading, essentially. So I'm aware of that, and what I'm telling you is that it's causing the increase in solar activity from the sun. Oh shit, I fucked that up. This is another thing. Internet arguments. You fuck up your grammar a little bit, and then suddenly two guys that agree with each other are at each other's throats. So I'm aware of that, and what I'm telling you is it's causing the increase. What's causing the increase is the solar activity from the sun. And then he posts a picture of the graph that I'm referring to, and he's like, "You saw this graph, right? Solar activity and temperature increase show no correlation." And what he's not understanding is what I was trying to demonstrate to him by stating the correlation that I was pointing to. So I'm saying I'm very clearly demonstrating to you the 30-year gap between spikes in solar activity and temperature increases on the Earth. Yes, and that graph is misleading. The bolded average lines are not an accurate measurement of the temperature. Look at the peaks, okay? The data from which the average is extrapolated. There is very clearly a 30-year gap from when the solar activity peaks on the sun and the 30 years afterwards that it takes the thermal energy to arrive at the Earth from the sun. So that's my hypothesis, is that there is some lag in time between these big bursts in solar activity on the sun and when the thermal energy from those bursts arrives at the Earth. So I keep going through and I point out 1950, large peak on the sun. 1980, large peak on the Earth's temperature. 1960, largest peak from the sun. 1990, large temperature peak on the Earth. So now he decides to play the game of change the graph. And he goes, how clearly do you have proof? The only argument against the graph you've given is that it's misleading. This is a better graph, in my humble opinion, as it shows exactly when the trend of the above normal greenhouse emissions started. And the issue with this graph is that the data the data isn't the same as the data that's on the other graph. Yes, the x-axis is longer, but he's comparing the length of the sun cycle to the amount of irradiation coming from the sun. So those are two different things that are being compared. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. And he says we can't map the whole temperature in that time frame as it fluctuates. And he thinks I don't understand the difference between an averaged out temperature as far as the data points for the year and an averaged out temperature of averaged out temperatures from year to year. Because that's what those lines show. And so he's going, we can't map the whole temperature in that time frame as it fluctuates. So we have to use the average temperature all around the planet, which gives a better view. And what he doesn't seem to understand is that the initial data points are the average temperatures from all around the planet, and the average is the fluctuation not throughout the year, but from year to year. And I'm going, you don't understand how to read a fucking graph, dude. Whatever you learned was propaganda. You're aware the red line is the temperature on the Earth, and the blue one is solar activity, right? And he goes, so what is your refutation, other than me ingesting my own echo chamber propaganda? It's clear that you cannot read graphs and correlations either. So he's now conceding that he doesn't really know what the fuck he's reading either. And he's like, whatever, dude. So he's getting butthurt. I go, the second graph you're presenting here is just the averages and not the data points behind it. You like this graph because it suits your narrative better than the one with the more data on it that you presented originally. And he's like, all right then, let's have it your way and put the overall temperatures. It shows even less correlation than before, affirming my position that solar activity has no effect on temperature increase. And what he doesn't want to hear is the theory that there could be, this is the hypothesis, that there could be a 25 to 30 year lag from these bursts of energy on the sun to when that thermal energy arrives at the Earth. Okay, so then I go, the other thing is the two graphs you're presenting aren't even reflecting the same freaking data points. Come on, stop pretending you know how to science, man. And he goes, funny, because the x-axis in this graph is different. Sounds like you cannot read graphs either. And it's like, that's literally what I just said. Get your head around this, dude. 30 years. 30 years is the amount of time it takes thermal energy to travel from the sun to the Earth. Now, that was a very boldly stated hypothesis that I hadn't done any research on. But the cool thing about this argument is that it made me go and do more research. And seems like I'm able to prove my hypothesis, which is why I was arrogant enough to make this ridiculous bro science debunks global warming video. And the thing is, I'm not saying that global warming isn't happening. I do think global warming is happening, but what we're debunking here is the idea that global warming is being caused by man-made CO2 emissions, because what I'm pretty certain of is that what's causing it is increased solar activity from the sun. So he says, seems like it should have stabilized then. It hasn't. Trying to theorize a trend in temperature cycles fails to make one better than the current model. So his whole position on it is, my theory is the conventional held theory, and you're talking about something that's unknown. And so until you have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that that's the thing, I'm not even going to entertain the hypothesis. And a lot of people that think they're scientific think like that. And I think that's one of the big things that's holding us back in these conversations that we're trying to have about science, because it seems like people have forgotten that we're just fucking over-evolved apes. And, we're all trying to figure this shit out. So, I respond with, I'm well aware that the x-axis is different. The part that concerns me is the discrepancy in information presented on the y-axis, because there is a discrepancy. And he goes, what concern you? And then I have a little bit of fun with him. I go, the numbers, Hans. They don't add up. And he says, how the temperature is collected. Fine, that's probably a good argument to get to, as I also feel IPCC are just corporate shills. But the original papers from where the data comes from seems fairly credible to me. And I'm going, yeah, but you don't have any credibility to me on how to read graphs, and you seem to be advancing an ideological position and not a scientific one. And since you can't engage in a calm, hypothetical conversation exploring a scientific possibility that has not really entered into your thought process before, I don't think you're capable of scientific thought. So then he goes, Thomas, they add up, correlating perfectly with the increased amount of CO2 emissions. Presents no data to suggest this. And the other thing is, I have yet to come across any data that clearly links CO2 emissions to an increase in temperature. I haven't found it. If, share it with me if you got the smoking gun. And I'm going, this is where I get rude. I mean, I've been pretty rude the whole time, let's be honest, but I'm kind of a dick. You don't know an asshole from a vagina or a minor from an adult, Sonny Jim. One graph is comparing total solar irradiance to temperature change. The other is comparing temperature to solar cycle length. And then he says, both of which show no correlation with the current spike in temperature. Again, he's not interested in hearing anything that I'm trying to suggest to him. He's just going, my theory works, my theory fits, and I don't need to hear anything else. But your theory doesn't fit. It's not correct. You just believe it's correct because everyone around you does. That's why most crazy-ass Christians are calling calling science a cult, because it's no longer a method of investigation and study. This very clearly is like some type of cult where you all believe in this doctrine and this dogma and you don't question anything. But if somebody else comes and then other people start believing it, then you'll jump on the bandwagon. You know, it's like sports teams. Anyways, so I go, what you're ignoring is that both graphs depict an increase in temperature being correlating with increased solar activity. And then, you know, I get into some stuff with, are you familiar with seventh wave? And the seventh wave is a theory that like every 7th, 9th, or 11th wave is the biggest. It's like a sailing thing. If you're ever out on the water, that's just a weird kind of phenomenon that people have picked up on. It's not an exact science, but it's a thing that people have noticed. So I say, are you familiar with seventh wave and the sun's cycle of nuclear fission? I've since been corrected that it's actually nuclear fusion. One graph shows the solar activity spiking in 1940. The other shows it spiking in 1960. The more accurate graph depicts the highest peak, or the 7th wave, in 1960. So these two different graphs were showing this big peak in solar activity 20 years apart. So contradictory information that he's presenting. And he's like, I'm aware of sun cycles and nuclear fusion, but the cycles don't correlate with a spike in temperature. And then I go, I didn't say fusion, I said fission. Big difference. He was right about that. The sun is fusion, not fission. Anyways, so till the 1970s, the solar activity was a good indication of the temperature around. Since then, we needed better models to explain the temperature increase. So I post him a link to some nuclear fission stuff, and I try and say, cumulative temperature rise actually perfectly explains the post-1990, not 1970, 1990. Up till 1990, we're still riding off the major solar peak from 1960. And he says, so then he goes, says current model is wrong, failed to provide a better model. Dude, the sun does give indications of acting like a nuclear reactor, but it's not the reason for the current spikes in temperature. You want to refute global warming, find something better than solar activity or fossil fuel emissions. That's what people are doing. I'm saying, yes, it is. Your dogmatic adherence to the false consensus-based scientific conclusion is preventing you from rationally being able to think in scientific terms for yourself. Why? Because you don't know how to science. You know how to argue. Your last statement proves your mentality is not focused on scientific evidence, but on public perception, which obviously has no bearing on objective reality. The reason the climate is warming up is due to increased solar activity from the sun. Anyone with half a brain in their head reading this thread would be able to figure that out, so thank you. Now, okay, that's kind of where it ended for the most part, but there was, a little bit more back and forth, and I did a little bit more digging, just a little bit more research, because, I had some questions. I wanted to calculate how long it would take, because, okay, so light from the sun gets to the Earth 8 minutes and 20 seconds after, for light to travel from the sun to the Earth, it takes 8 minutes and 20 seconds, okay? And what I wanted to figure out is how long would it take a sound wave to travel from the sun to the earth. And the thing is sound, some people try and say that sound waves can't travel through space, but there is actually some advanced science that you can find on the old Google that suggests that the sun, or that sound waves can actually travel through space, and it's not nearly as fast as they travel on the Earth. How fast? Apparently 192 meters per second. So what I'm theorizing is essentially that phonon quasi-particles of atomic nuclei and electrons are traveling in this kind of sound wave that is accompanying the nuclear reactions taking place on the surface of the sun, and those sound waves are moving at 192 meters per second. And the interesting thing is actually when you do the math on how long it would take these sound waves to travel through space at 192 meters per second, traveling the 150 million kilometers, that would take approximately 25 years. Which is interesting, because when you look at that graph, right, that's, I feel like Nickelback, eh? Look at this graph. But the 25 years is what I'm trying to say, is where that, how it, and I don't have the scientific vocabulary to explain what I'm trying to say, but I do think I've been able to move the ball a little bit down the field here to suggest that thermal energy does have some play in cosmology. And so I think what's happening and why the temperature is rising is because we're experiencing almost like a mini tsunami of heat from the sun, and these waves from these spikes in solar activity, since there's a lag time of about 25 years for them to get here, that there is what's called a cumulative heat rise. And so the Earth is starting to warm up. And I think as we kind of get, from what I'm seeing on the way that the peak is, since the last big peak was in 1960, so then 1971, 1982, 1993, 2004, 2015. So we're going to probably, if it's another 2 sun cycles before we get another big burst, which would be 22 years, well, minus 3, so it'd be 19 years, we're either going to get a major, huge spike in 19 years that'll probably destroy the planet, not instantly, but it'll, like the gun effect, and like climate change is real. I'm not saying that climate change isn't happening. I just don't think it's CO2 that's causing it. I think it's the solar activity shit. But, so if the next big is the 7th cycle from the last one in 1960, that'll be in 19 years from now. But if it's 9 or 11 cycles from the last big, then the temperature would actually drop to a point where we wouldn't get this flood of heat. I'm trying to explain heat using waves, if that makes sense. I'm trying to suggest that heat is moving through the solar system, kind of like waves crashing onto a beach. So this has been YouTube Bro Science. debunks CO2 climate change. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope maybe you got a good laugh. I hope maybe if you're someone that's better at science than me, someone that's more knowledgeable than I, you can kind of see what I'm trying to say and, figure out how this is. Because I think if the human race wants to have a chance to survive into the future, it's very important for us to understand very clearly how these sun cycles work and operate, and work towards becoming an interplanetary civilization. And I think it's a good idea to maybe start looking at moving to Mars, because if it's going to get too hot here and the planet's not going to be sustainable because the sun's getting hotter, then getting to another planet would be good. And Mars would probably start to warm up because, more solar activity means the temperature is going to get hotter out there. So this Goldilocks zone would kind of be shifting. I'd suggest that perhaps this Goldilocks zone thing, I've heard some other bro scientists try and say that the human race initially lived on Venus. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, and I think we potentially have no way of knowing that. But, maybe we do have some way of knowing that. I'm not, I don't have any power or access to any information, I'm just a bro scientist. It's just a prank, bro!